It's a presentation on a subject that is very dear to my heart and dear to a number of my patients' hearts too. It's using IV therapies to take care of cardiometabolic disorders and using them in anti-aging medicine. Now, many of you in the audience have actually listened to my presentation last year of the whole workshop that I did here in Bali for 4 hours on chelation, basically to detoxify yourselves. But this was meant to be a 1.5 hour presentation on how you can use IV therapies in general anti-aging treatments. And I'm not just going to talk to you about chelation. I will talk to you a little about chelation initially, but I'm also going to talk about other IV therapies. I've spoken about glutathione yesterday, which is an important part of the whole armamentarium of IV therapies. But there are others that I use too. So I'm going to be a little, but the major chunk of it is how you use IV therapies to detoxify your body first. Basically, if you really want to get good outcomes of your patient's health and give them good health, you need to look at the 5 areas that we normally look at in my clinic. We look at a patient, we see whether the patient has proper nutrition, so we do supplements the nutrients. We check whether the patient is detoxified, so therefore most of the time they are not, so we detoxify the patient. Then we check whether their hormones are balanced. It's never done before the detoxification is done. The hormone balance is done always after the detoxification. And then we make sure that the patient is happy with his mind and strong in his body. So when you look at all these 5 areas, detoxification forms a big base in what you do to achieve total health in your patient. So to start with, I'd like to say, believe nothing, no matter who you read, or where you read it, or who said it, no matter if others said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. Now, this is a slide that many of you have seen, and I like to keep repeating it. It starts with young hearts in danger zone. Now, if you look at it very minutely where I'm pointing, it's a 17-year-old army recruit undergoes bypass surgery. His cholesterol level was normal, but he had deposits in his arteries. The next line says, 23-year-old complains of chest pain. Tests reveal a heart condition and he undergoes bypass surgery. A 30-year-old dental surgeon undergoes bypass surgery a 2nd time. What could this be? Hey, when we were in medical school, we were told that heart disease is seen in elderly patients as you grow older, not 17-year-olds. So what's this? Stressed out 16-year-old boy has a heart attack. And if you look at this boy, he is practically bald. This was not done by a barber, it was his condition when he landed up. So what could this be? Now when you look at heart disease or any cardiometabolic disorders, what are the common tests that you do? Maybe a stress test or treadmill, cholesterol levels, CT angio, coronary angio. This is what a cardiologist would get you to do. And what are the solutions of it? Either you do an angioplasty or a CABG. That's a bypass surgery. But I see a lot of patients who have already done both these. And the cardiologist will write on the angio, active medical management. I don't know what it means. You have already cut this guy open, you have done 2 angioplasties on him, and finally you write active medical management. His condition is the same when he came in first time to you. I don't know why he didn't write it then. But he writes it at the end when we can't do anything else. And that's when the patient comes to us. Now there's a growing body of literature that suggests that heart attacks develop from insignificant non-stenotic blocks, normally less than 50%. So if you see an angio and you have a 90% in an RCA or a 80% in an LAD and a 15% maybe in the LCS, it's that 15-20% that you've got to be careful about, because that's what's going to give you a heart attack, not the big ones. And there's enough evidence, because this has been already reported in two major magazines or publications, Circulation and Clinical Cardiology. This is something that's one of my favorite slides, and I use it everywhere, because this actually shows you that optical medical therapy with or without angioplasty for stable coronary artery disease. And what it says the initial management strategy in patients with stable coronary artery disease, angioplasty or PCR, percutaneous intervention, did not reduce the risk of death, myocardial infarction, or other major cardiovascular events when added to optimal medical therapy. And this was published in New England Journal of Medicine as recently as 2007. It was also presented at the American College of Cardiology a month earlier, on the 26th of March, if I'm not mistaken. So you have data which says that angioplasty really doesn't work and doesn't have a place in stable angina, chronic stable angina patients. But 95% of our patients who are being operated or angioplasty being done are patients who have chronic stable angina. In fact, I have patients who were not even heart patients. They had gone for a routine annual checkup. Their stress test was mildly positive. It was rushed in for an angio. Angio showed multiple blockages. So we had 3 stents put in this patient. So from being a perfectly normal person who would play golf 3 times a week, this man becomes a heart patient when he goes to do his routine medical. So this particular article tells you this sort of patients should not be touched. But somehow we keep doing it. Now, angioplasty, as they say today, has only 2 indications. It can be done within 4 hours of an acute myocardial infarction as a rescue angioplasty, or probably in an episode of acute coronary syndrome or unstable angina. It has no place in chronic stable angina. Now, after having seen all this, what you see, could it be metal toxicities? Why? Because the air that we breathe is full of metals, the food that we eat is full of metals, and the groundwater is full of metals. And all these are primarily responsible for the aging that you see today, especially the premature aging. I'd like you to see this particular drug. This is an Ayurvedic medication that is being sold openly in India. And if you look at this, it has mercury sulfide. Now, how safe is this? We really don't know. But this is being sold in pharmacies across India. So what are heavy metals? I'm not going to spend time on this, but there are more than 20 heavy metals. But the ones that are important to us are lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. These are important because they are highly toxic and cause damaging effects at very low concentrations. Why are they toxic? Let us see, this is one of the areas which is one of the reasons why they are toxic. If you look here, you have a metalloprotein that is bound to zinc. Now zinc plays a major role in so many of our body biochemical reactions. But if you look here, when cadmium gets it throws the zinc out and it sits where zinc used to sit. Does this metalloprotein does not or cannot function like a normal metalloprotein. It has gone and replaced it, it has mimicked it, and it has come and sat here. So there are many mechanisms, and if we go through this, it will take me an hour and a half to teach you each of these mechanisms. But I'm not going to go through all of that. But one of the more important ones is mimicry, where you have cadmium, copper, and nickel that act as mimics for zinc that you have just seen. Thallium mimics potassium and manganese. Arsenate, vendate mimic phosphate. Selenate, maltate, chromate mimic sulfate. And then you have organometallic compounds that can also act as mimics of biological chemicals. For example, methyl mercury, which is transported by an amino acid or organic anion transporters. So mimicry is one way where metals, and this is the more common way that you see, where metals replace good ones like selenium and zinc, and does cause early cell death. And like I said yesterday in my glutathione presentation, you need glutathione to bring these metals out. It goes and pulls this metal out from the cell, and then, as you will see here, the other chelators take it away from the body. Now you have other ways where metals act. They have what is known as they cause what is known as oxidative damage. Then you have the ionic forms. For example, nickel can induce an expression which is thought to play a key role in nickel carcinogenesis. There are other chemical related factors that directly impact the toxic potential of metals. You would see, for instance, that chromium can differentiate the essential naturally occurring trivalent chromium from a hexavalent chromium, which is actually the toxic species. So you need to know what is the chemical form which is good. For example, methyl mercury is a potent neurotoxin, while inorganic mercurials, they attack the kidney. So the kind of ionic composition of the metal is also important, and that is how they will act in your body. Now I must put some literature before you, because I can keep giving you theory, but the literature says that there's no toxic threshold of lead. This means there's no measurable level of lead in the body below which no harm occurs. Now this was not said by me. It was said by a study which was based on the 3rd National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, the NANS3. And what they concluded there is that if you have blood levels of 30 micrograms per deciliter in your blood, which is considered to be normal by modern medicine. In fact, this one shows you less than that, around 25. The deaths from cancer is about 68%, and from cardiovascular disease is about 46%. And if you have half the level which was considered safe, you still have all-cause mortality of 20%, and from cancer of about 46%. So from this they concluded that there is no safe level of lead in your body. Lead at any level contributes increased disease-related mortality, especially from heart disease, cancer, and other degenerative disorders seen in aging. Now, how does lead actually cause vascular disease? And this is how it does, because chronic lead exposure, you ask me where does lead come from? It comes again from your water, food, air, from all the three. And what it does is you get chronic heart disease, you get peripheral arterial disease, you get arrhythmias, hypertension, left ventricular hypertrophy, and you get stroke. You have more literature which shows you that in cases of MI, myocardial infarction and stroke, the association was evident at less than 0.1 micromoles per liter. So even less than what you saw in the NANS3 studies. Now you have many mechanisms of lead toxicity, and why I say lead is because when you look at vascular problems like cardiovascular or cerebrovascular, it is mainly lead and cadmium that affects you. And where does the cadmium come from? Cadmium comes from many times the air that you're breathing. Incidentally, if you remember, about 10-15 years back, we didn't have too many tires that were radial. we used to get tires that were normal, at least in our country, and then we used to radialize, we used to change them for radial tires. Now when they radialize these tires, they use cadmium. And as the tires wear out, you have the cadmium dust in the air, which does get into your body. Now, some of these mechanisms are the same as most others, but I'd like to focus on this too: endothelial inflammation and endothelial dysfunction. Now, both these are directly related to heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, or any kind of vascular disease that a patient suffers from. Again, in our clinic, we check for one very important marker, and that is homocysteine. Why? Because increased levels of lead lead to serum homocysteine levels going up. And let me tell you this, only 40%, and this is not my statistics, only 40% of the people who die of heart attacks have high cholesterol. Well, close to 90% have high homocysteine levels. And most of the time, high homocysteine is here. Two more important enzymes that it inactivates are delta aminolevulinic acid dehydrogenase and glutathione reductase. And when glutathione reductase does get deactivated, you do not get, like I said yesterday, glutathione disulfide becoming reduced glutathione, which is important for you to remove the lead out of your cell. So then you have, instead of glutathione being formed, you have homocysteine which is formed. So both these are associated with cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline and dysfunction. And again, this was published. Lead accumulation has been also associated with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And many a times, many of our Parkinson's patients improve by just giving them ordinary chelation. We don't do anything more than that. We don't give them glutathione and all that. They improve with just this, because then it is more because of lead and other metals that they are having this problem. Cardiac arrhythmias are also seen in people with lead. Again, when you see hypertension, lead accumulation is an independent risk factor for developing hypertension, especially in men. This was published in 1996 by JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association. Now, when it comes to mercury, this was a very interesting article, and I have really summarized it as they have put it. It spoke about mercury promoting atherosclerosis and hence increasing the risk of myocardial infarction in several ways. It goes on to actually speak about various ways it does it, but more importantly, it talks about mercury inactivating antioxidant properties of glutathione, catalase, ester peroxide, etc. Alright? And the article found that mercury levels were directly associated with the risk of myocardial infarction, and that this partially offset the protective effects of DHA derived from eating fish. So, New England Journal of Medicine in its editorial in the same issue said the notion that methylmercury contributes to cardiovascular disease is certainly a testable hypothesis and one that warrants further testing. Unfortunately, nothing was done post that, but if we had to do studies like we do for drugs, yes, this would have been definitely demonstrated. Most of the times you have cadmium and mercury synergizing with lead, causing bigger damage on the arterial walls, and you have the rise in BP in young and aging persons termed as essential hypertension. Now I don't know where this term came from, but we don't need essential hypertension in our lives. Normally you say something which is essential is what you need. I'm sure we don't need hypertension, but this was based on the fact that this came from an accumulative heavy metal overload, and none of us understood it. Advancing age simply reflects the length of time you are exposed to the metal like lead, cadmium or mercury. Hence, in an aging study that was done by Harvard, when you removed age, or age was not a factor when you included lead as a factor. Now, how does it affect cardiovascular disease? In 2000, Atherosclerosis, a publication of the American Heart Association, said that there is a twofold rise of anterior wall MI to those exposed with mercury and 2.9-fold risk of cardiovascular death when you have in the highest tertile of mercury exposure as against those in the lowest. What happens when you are exposed to arsenic? Well, you have atherosclerosis, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, ischemic heart disease, and peripheral vascular disease. So all that you don't want is there. And 90% of the patients that you get, about the age of even 45 today, have all this. And when you look at countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, most of our water has got arsenic in it. It's so unfortunate. Heavy metal overload in adrenal glands reduce the production of hormones, which cause early aging, stress, decreased sex drive, and aggravation of menopausal symptoms. And this is one of the reasons why I personally do not see the hormone levels of any patient in my clinic till they have undergone a course of detoxification. Till they have undergone, even if they're very young, if they're 40, we give them a preventive set of detoxification which lasts for about 4 to 8 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and then we test their hormones. And we see the difference, and I have seen this difference many a time. Most diabetics do not respond to their medication. One of the reasons is because of heavy metal overload. I get diabetics, because that's a big portion of my practice, who come to me with sometimes 40 units of insulin in the morning, 40 units of insulin in the night, maybe 3 grams or 2 grams of metformin, and their sugar, if you would like to believe, is still, fasting sugars are still 300 plus, and the HbA1c is about 14. So this patient is like a living time bomb when he comes into my clinic. And most of the times we just tell them, hey listen, I am not going to change any of your medications. You can leave them as they are because your diabetologist will hold me responsible for this. And we're going to put you on IV therapy. So we chelate them first, and then we give the other IV therapy that I'm going to show you a little later. And I'll tell you this, I still have a patient in my clinic who has just stopped the same load of insulin on himself, and he now takes just 500 plus 500 milligrams of metformin, once in the morning, once at night. So metals do play a lot of role in insulin because in diabetes because of the insulin resistance that you see when you see adjuvants like aluminium and mercury that are found in a lot of these vaccines. And I was listening to actually yesterday for infections in the elderly. When I treat my elderly, normally don't ask them to take the new pneumococcal vaccines, primarily because of adjuvants like aluminium and mercury in these vaccines. I normally don't ask them unless it is very, very, very important. I don't do it as a prevention on normal level. Again, mercury and cadmium inhibit magnesium and zinc levels, as well as inhibiting glucose transfer and other mechanisms by which mercury and toxic metals are factors in metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. So you see, mercury and cadmium also play a huge role. And there is a study which actually shows you, which was published about a year and a half back, which I don't have here, which actually shows you that cadmium is responsible for increase in the number of diabetics between the age of 30 and 40 in India. We have a lot of young population which is diabetics between the age of 30 and 40, and a study did show that they have high levels of cadmium in them. Now these were serum levels. Now if you actually do a challenge test, which we do to check the exposure to this, chronic exposure to this, you'll get many more metals coming out. So for adults, silent symptoms of chronic low-level heavy metal accumulation in tissues can progress from a steady decline in energy, productivity, quality of life to accelerated cardiovascular disease, premature dementia, and total debilitation. Unfortunately, the possibility of heavy metal burden is never considered, and patients continue to suffer needlessly. And this I see on a regular basis in my practice. Now, what is the solution? When people come into our clinic, we take a very detailed history. In fact, I've got 3 assistants who spend about an hour with each patient, and the patient normally comes in very early in the morning. I reach my clinic only at 11 in the morning, but my assistant has already set all my appointments for the day and done a very detailed history taking. We need to know exactly what is wrong with the patient, or what are their complaints, what is their drug history, what is their kind of food habits, where they work, etc., etc., etc. So you do have, and of course the immunization history, because you need to know whether they're exposed to this thimerosal. Thimerosal has mercury in it. We also are very careful to find out whether the patient has been taking any Ayurvedic medications. Then we do a test. If we think that there is any metal intoxication, and we would like to prove to the patient that there is metals involved, you have what is known as a challenge test. So you give about a gram of DMSA, that's what I do. But before I do that, I take the urine, then I give 4 grams of a gram of DMSA, that's 4 tablets of 250 milligrams of DMSA, and then I take their urine again. And then we send this urine to doctors' data in the US, and we can then see the kinds of metals that are there. Now you see this, lead is very high, mercury is very high. So you get 2 test results, one before you have given a chelator, and one that you get after you have given one. So it does give you an indication of what could be the possible cause of metal intoxication and early aging. So how are these removed? They're removed by a process of chelation, most of you know it. Normally you have 2 kinds, especially when you're using IV types. You have EDTA, which is a common one used for most vascular chelations, and I use zinc DTPA for those who want it written on honey. We also have oral ones, specifically DMSA and DMPS, and I use a lot of DMSA for 2 conditions. One is in autism, which has shown very, very good results, and the second one is in case of psoriasis. And everybody was shocked, including my skin specialist friends, who didn't understand how psoriasis could be treated with a chelator. So we said, yes, psoriasis does have a metal component to it, and we'll prove it to you. And this was an accidental discovery because a friend of mine was taking DMSA for something else, and his psoriasis cleared up. So we tried it on a couple of other patients, and yes, you have psoriasis clearing up. But I must tell you, it's not a permanent cure, because as long as the metal is out, you don't have the skin lesions. The moment you are exposed again to the metal, you get it back. So you've got to keep chelating yourself probably every year, every 6 months, or whatever. Now, what is the chelation? We all know it's removal of heavy metals from the body. I'm not going to get into this because many of you know this basis, but this is a part of it. But let me tell you that EDTA has been approved by FDA in case of lead poisoning, hypercalcemia, and most importantly, ventricular arrhythmias and digitalis toxicity. So if your patient is on digoxin, please remember if you chelate him, the effect of digoxin is gone. Alright? What does EDTA do? It increases the body's own production of nitric oxide, and you need that because it's the endothelium relaxing factor. It helps prevent platelet aggregation, that's platelet stickiness and thick blood. It helps prevent development of small blood clots, improves the immune system functioning, binds lead, causing lead to leave the body when EDTA is excreted to urine and feces. EDTA helps promote absorption of magnesium and zinc. Activates natural polysaccharides to work like heparin and increases the lifespan by 50%, suggesting safety. it has been found highly beneficial in treatment of occlusive vascular disease caused by atherosclerosis and chronic degenerative disorders. Normally we give about 30 sittings, so if you're doing it as a prevention for anti-aging, and if you find that the patient needs it, specifically when you're looking at women who come with, I get a lot of women who come with ages between 20 to 25 with menstrual irregularities. We first chelate them with only 10 sittings, and then we do their hormone levels. But if you're doing it for cardiovascular and other chronic degeneration, minimum would be 30 sittings at least twice a week. And then you maintain this treatment every year. So I normally get my patients to choose a month in a year. Suppose they say January, then every January they come back and they do about 8 to 10 every year. Now what are the constituents? I'm not going to get into each of them, but for those of you who attended the last year's workshop, I'd just like to say this much, that over the last 1 year, we have removed the ascorbate out of this. We have removed the vitamins and minerals out of this drip, and we give it as a separate drip. So if you had recorded what I said last year and you're following that, you can now put this in a small separate drip, both these products. Now how safe is it? Well, lethal doses value drugs injected in a rat. If you look at, let's say aspirin, we all take aspirin regularly, right? You would need 420 milligrams per kilogram weight of the rat to make it lethal for the rat. But you see how safe PGTA is. You need more than practically 5 times that, or nearly 5 times that to become as lethal. So it's safer, 5 times safer than aspirin. I mean, this was published. It's not something that it was published way back in '79. Now, how do you use two chelators? Normally, what we do is we combine the action of PGTA and DMSA when you think that mercury is involved. Because while PGTA will take care of cadmium and lead, DMSA takes care of mercury, specifically mercury, right? DMSA effectively detoxifies the central nervous system. So if you are having patients with stroke and other CNS degenerative disorders, you need to do this. While PGTA is useful for vascular problems and detoxifies all other organs. So to ensure that you are not afflicted with the scourges of early aging and chronic degeneration, we need to detoxify and rid ourselves of toxic metal load regularly. Because you are always exposed. You cannot change the food that you eat, you cannot change the water that you drink, and most importantly, you cannot change the air that you are breathing. So if you can't change that, you might as well detoxify yourself regularly. The best way to detoxify ourselves initially is IV detox. I normally tell my patients, get yourself done once, then you can repeat it every year for a shorter span. But during the course, till you come back to me next year, I do give you oral chelators which are natural, homegrown vegetables and other things, juices and things like that, like cilantro and many others, which can become homegrown. And if you attended the last year's workshop, there was a list which I had spoken about. I spoke about a list of oral chelators that you could use at home even the year before. So if you need that, I'll give it to you a little later. I don't think that slide is here. IV drips used for detoxification contain chelators and are responsible to achieve good health and a high degree of wellness. Many a times they're known as wellness drips. Now I'll get to the other ones that I use. Alright? I spoke about glutathione yesterday. Glutathione is the first one. And I'll give you this protocol that I use. If you're using glutathione, please use it before you give chelation, not after. Because like I said, glutathione or N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor of glutathione, does remove or detoxify the cell. It's intracellular detoxification. And when it gets out, it's only then do the other chelators work. I'm not talking about ALA, I'm talking about glutathione and N-acetylcysteine, which I spoke of yesterday. So I'm just repeating that. You need to use that before you do chelation. Now when do I use alpha-lipoic acid? Well, that's for you, Andralia. You asked me. I use this for my diabetic patients. This is one of the best antioxidants because it is both water soluble as well as fat soluble. It also gets through to the vein, so it goes there, it goes through the entire body. So if you look at it, tissues composed by fat like nervous tissues, as well as those composed by water like heart. So it's an antioxidant at the cellular level in both the areas. It is more potent than vitamin C and vitamin E. It recharges both. No free-flowing LA in body unless derived from food or consumed orally or in supplements, or the rest is IV. So if you really do have a bad diabetic patient, my suggestion to you, give him IV glutathione and on the same day put him IV ALA. 10 drips down the line, check his HbA1c or check his fasting blood glucose levels. You see how the drop starts happening. ALA is beautiful. 900 milligrams to 1,200 milligrams IV in a small 100cc, 200cc T5, not NS, is a fantastic drip to give, IV drip to give for diabetics. Just remember that if you have a diabetic who's not getting controlled, you get ALA very easily in the open market. It's being sold for skin whiteness of all things. It's used in Germany, and I think German society can tell you this, with an on-label use that it is used for diabetic neuropathy and to prevent diabetic nephropathy. But you can use it much before that to lower diabetes, to lower the levels of the patient's diabetes, and to respond and make them respond to diabetic drugs. This is how I do it. And it has already been reported that there's increased insulin sensitivity by 27 to 51% respectively, depending on what dosages you use. If you use 600 milligrams, it's about 27% improvement. But if you increase the dosage to 1000 milligrams, it is 51% better. And by this, I mean insulin sensitivity. So most of our patients in the third world are basically people who have very bad insulin sensitivity. We have metabolic syndrome patients. This is where you need ALA, to improve the insulin sensitivity. It prevents the production of advanced glycation end products, AGE, that we call, which are responsible for all the damage that diabetes does to your various body organs. Like I said, in Germany it is on-label use for diabetic neuropathy. It helps peripheral vascular disease in diabetics by improving endothelium and dependent vasodilation. Okay. Another place that it is used in these dosages is to preserve brain function, besides the diabetic, and for numbness, tingling sensations, for preventing cataracts if you use it well in advance, and for improving the hepatic function. Now I must tell you, ALA does wonders to my practice. Like I said yesterday, I get a lot of patients on the wheelchair. And to see them walking after 45 days, or maybe 60 days, it's a different feeling. It's a high that you can't get with anything else. And that's the high that I get when I see this done. So these are some of the other IV therapies that we use. I just told you about magnesium EDTA drip, zinc TGPA for all heavy metal detox, ALA we have spoken about, N-acetylcysteine I normally use along with glutathione because it's a precursor. It's used in all cerebral conditions and cardiomyopathies. So if I have a patient who has an ejection fraction maybe of 15%, I will use glutathione and ALA first, and then maybe after a month or two, I will start the actual chelation process. Because it really does help. The glutathione levels go up, everything goes up, the body is able to take a process of chelation. Because chelation, you must remember, is a very exothermic reaction. And a person really feels tired at the end of it. Sometimes the patient can't even go back home. So if the patient has bad ejection fraction, and if you start chelating the patient is going to be never coming back to you for treatment. He's going to be feeling so rotten that you say, hey, forget this treatment. It's making me worse than what I am already. So it's always better to give them this ALA, N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, which makes them feel well, or maybe even vitamin C, high dose vitamin C here, in debilitating geriatric conditions. Now when I say high dose vitamin C, please, it's not 1 and 2 grams. We talk about 25 or 50 grams, not milligrams, grams. 50 grams, 50,000 milligrams. Alright? It's not, what we get in the market is 100 milligrams. I'm talking about 5 grams. Or 50 grams, not 5 grams, 50 grams. 25 grams and 50 grams is what actually gives you the kind of results that you want. You give 5 grams, you will be feeling a little better. If you give 2 grams IV, it acts as an oxidant rather than an antioxidant. Less than 2 grams.
Oh, yeah?
When you have oral vitamin C, but please, somebody asked me this question yesterday. When you have oral vitamin C, more than 1 gram, 1.2 grams does not get absorbed. So the higher you go, the lower is the absorption. So in oral, you do give 1 gram a day, there's no problem. That is high dose in oral. But when you're giving IV and you want to see quick results, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50 grams. Alright? And you can go through, if you need, I will send you all the data on vitamin C. You can read it yourself and convince yourself. Absolutely none. Absolutely none. Even if you have kidney problem, you can, there's a way of reversing the whole thing and you can still use high dose vitamin C. And incidentally, let me explain this to you. I do ozone. So if I have patients with kidney problems, I subject them to ozone. And if they don't really come out well on ozone, because you are dependent on your ozone generator, the machine, to give you good quality ozone, I shift them to high dose vitamin C because it does the same thing. And they act as antagonists, so you cannot give them together. So, glutathione I spoke of yesterday. But I'd like to speak about a little bit about L-carnitine drips. I must tell you this. This is a personal experience as far as I am concerned. When I have an MI, I use L-carnitine to reverse the damage on my heart in 4 days flat. 4 grams every day. 5th day, my echo showed a perfectly normal myocardium. This I did myself, and I did it in the ICU with the permission of my cardiologist, who then wrote down, this is my first case where I used L-carnitine, and I'm going to use it for the other cases. So, unless you do it on yourself, you can't do it on your patients. You have to be strong enough to understand the concept and do it on yourself. I did this, and I like to, and this one is very nice. So if you have a cardiomyopathy patient, add this L-carnitine with your N-acetylcysteine. Make a small 50cc drip and give it quick. And you see the difference in this patient after a couple of days. And then of course we have nutritional drips containing amino acids, vitamin C's and other things, and a little bit of magnesium, but these are slightly painful if the person who gives this drips is not really very adept. Because if you give high magnesium chloride in your drip, which I like to do, it's sometimes very painful because my nurses don't give it very nicely. They do. If it goes into the wall or it, slightly gets out, you have a problem. So in conclusion, it's unwise to ignore chronic heavy metal toxicity. The concept that chronic heavy metal toxicity does not exist is a myth. If you talk to any metal toxicologist, or basically toxicologists, they will say there's nothing called chronic metal toxicity. Dr. Wong is here. He would tell you that his Singapore Medical Council said there's nothing known as chronic metal toxicity. But yes, it is a myth. It does exist. It is the cause of early degeneration in every person on the planet today. You're not supposed to have your menopause at 35. You're not supposed to have menstrual irregularities at 25. These are not supposed to happen. Why are they happening? Question yourselves. When it hits you, you will understand what it is. Because patients depend on you for answers. So unless you question yourself, unless you question the very medicine that you do, you're not going to be able to give answers to your patients. And the answers that the patient wants so that the patient feels well. Alright? So introducing IV detox protocols for heavy metal toxicity in your engaging protocol would improve outcomes and overall patient well-being. Thank you. And
please contact the German Society for Thymus Therapy for further information.